now bring to the stage Dr. Linda Longmire, Professor of Political Science and Global Studies and Geography, where she teaches courses in global studies, human rights, and women's studies, and currently is the chair of the Center for Civic Engagement. Dr. Linda Longmire.
Again, welcome to our small but mighty gathering where we celebrate the International Day of Nonviolence. So grateful that all of you are here. I know there's a million other things going on at this time slot today, but as always, people who are interested in peace may not be in the majority, but they are the ones that make the difference. So we're so grateful that all of you found your way here today, where we commemorate, as we so have for many years now, the International Day of Nonviolence. This is a special year. We have a special guest that my colleague Ashish Kumar will tell you more about. But this is the 150th anniversary of the great luminary thinker in terms of nonviolence, Mahatma Gandhi. So we're very grateful you're all here. I want to just say two quick words about our Institute for Peace Studies, of which we are very proud, and it's been, again, a long process bringing it into fruition. IPS is part of our Center for Civic Engagement, where we encourage political fitness, both at a local level and at an international level as well. And particularly now, today, while the UN is meeting, where the environmental urgency is, I think, foremost on all of our minds. We're going to talk about peace and justice, of course, today, but it's important to remember that environmental peace and environmental justice is also part of that large project, that large task that we all have. So I'm really delighted that, again, that everyone is here, that we have a chance to listen to this distinguished scholar who will deepen our knowledge about Gandhi and his vision, the vision that still inspires us today as we think about how to make social change, how we work on fomenting peace and justice in this rather troubled world in which we all live. So I'd now like to introduce my dear colleague and friend, Professor Ashish Kumar, who will then introduce our guest. Again, thanks to all of you for being here. Ashish?
Thank you, Linda, and thank you, Athleen, and thank you all for taking the time to come and listen to Dr. Guha's remarks today. My name is Ashish Kumar. I'm a professor in the Herbert School of Communication, where I teach television and interactive media. On behalf of the Institute of Peace Studies, Center for Civic Engagement, and the Center for Race, Culture, and Social Justice, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to Dr. Ramachandra Guha. His visit today kicks off Hofstra's annual celebration of the International Day of Nonviolence on October 2nd. It also coincides with Gandhi's 150th birth year anniversary. Dr. Guha is a historian and writer whose work has spanned the environment, social political history, and naturally, cricket. Most recently, Ramachandra Guha has penned Gandhi, The Years That Changed the World, 1914 to 1948. The second inning, if you may, of a two-volume biography of Gandhi, the first of which is titled Gandhi Before India. Ramachandra Guha has taught at the universities of Yale, Stanford, and University of California at Berkeley. In the academic year 2011, he served as the Philippe Roman Professor of History and International Affairs at the London School of Economics. Guha's books and essays have been translated into more than 20 languages. He is the recipient of civilian honors, scholarly citations, and an honorary doctorate from Yale University. We are truly in the presence of one of the great minds of our times, and who better to contemplate the legacy of one of the greatest figures of the last century, Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. Statues to Gandhi are raised till this day. One went up in Parliament Square, London in 2015. Yet others are brought down, most recently at the University of Ghana campus in Africa. He's revered by many as the leader of the disinherited, yet reviled by present-day Dalit leaders in India. To chronicle such a historic figure is to grapple with the literary equivalent of the Stockholm Syndrome. Mr. Guha has managed to somehow wrangle these countervailing sentiments on Gandhi to produce a scholarly record of his formative years in South Africa, as well as his subsequent and perhaps better known time in India. For me, it is the South African years that contained Gandhi's Bildungsroman. Mandela is often quoted as having said, "You gave us Mohandas Gandhi, and we returned him to you as the Mahatma." And Guha has painstakingly put together the story of the making of this Mahatma, as evidenced by the nearly 100 pages of end notes in this volume. I'd like to end by reading these lines from Gandhi Before India, which are resonant today for reasons that I'll trust this gathering to surmise. The year is 1896, and ships carrying Indian workers, indentured laborers, and visitors are about to dock in Durban, South Africa. The first of such ships arrived in South Africa in 1860, carrying indentured laborers to work on sugarcane plantations run by the British colonists. At a meeting held in Durban's town hall on November 26, 1896, Guha writes, "Speakers urge the government to preserve Natal as an English colony and to, quote, maintain the race pure and undefiled, unquote, by putting an end to Indian immigration." One speaker said, quote, "It was sad to see the floodgates opened for the entrance to this colony of these dark and dismal people who were absolutely useless to the community. They were useless to the butcher, for they did not eat meat. They were useless to the baker, for they only ate the rice, the profits on the growth of which went to India, and the profits on the introduction went to the Indian ship owners." End quote. The specter of racial purity and supremacy did not die with colonialism. What does Gandhi's view of the world tell us about the world we occupy? How does globalization square with protectionism? How must citizens protest racial injustices at the hands of their own countrymen, while wars are waged on foreign soils in their name against racialized others? Is a committed nonviolent social movement possible against the modern militarized state? How can one bring the Gandhian creed of sustainability to aid in our activism to slow the climate crisis? To give us his sense of these issues and more, please join me in welcoming Dr. Ramachandra Guha.
Thank you, Professor Kumar, for those warm words of introduction. If my friends at the back don't mind coming up, I'd be happy if you leave halfway, that's not a problem. But it's just more intimate in this large room. If I'll wait for a minute, if you can just come up somewhere here, it just makes it easier for everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you all for coming here on a busy weekday morning. Before I begin, just one question so that I can orient myself about all of you. How many of you here have seen Richard Attenborough's film on Gandhi? All right, so about half. So just to refresh ourselves then about some basic facts about the man whom I'm talking about today. He was born in the Western Indian state of Gujarat in 1869. He went to school in two small towns, Porbandar and Rajkot. Then he went to London to get a law degree and came back to India and spectacularly failed to establish himself as a lawyer in Bombay. Every time I pass the High Court in Bombay, I offer a silent prayer for that failure. Partly because it enabled me to have a career as a biographer of Gandhi, but much more importantly because that failure enabled my country to get political freedom from the British. So he failed as a lawyer in Bombay and was rescued from professional obscurity by an invitation from South Africa, where two Gujarati merchants were engaged in a bitter business dispute. The matter had reached the law courts, and to solve the dispute, they needed a Gujarati-speaking lawyer educated in the British legal system. So he went to solve one dispute and stayed 20 years. And in those 20 years, he became the leader of the community of Indians to whom Professor Kumar referred. They were relatively small. There were about 150,000 Indians in between the ruling whites and the subordinated Africans. And Gandhi became the most significant leader of this community. While struggling for their rights, he fashioned his techniques of non-violent civil disobedience, to which he gave the name Satyagraha, or Truth Force. And after 20 years in the diaspora, in 1914, by which time he was already 45, Gandhi decided to return to India and try his hand at Indian politics, at which he succeeded quite soon. And by the end of the teens, by 1919, Gandhi was the most important leader of the Indian National Congress, which was the main political organization fighting for greater rights for Indians under British colonial rule. And he leads some very important struggles, non-violent struggles, including the non-cooperation movement of the 1920s, the Salt March of the 1930s, and the Quit India movement of the 1940s, culminating in Indian independence in 1947. But independence came at an awful cost. The country was freed from British rule, but also partitioned, because the rival party to the Congress, the Muslim League, led by Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who is effectively the villain of Attenborough's film, wanted a separate homeland for Muslims. So independence came at the cost of national division and bloody civil war. So that's all the facts I want to lay in front of those of you who didn't know very much about Gandhi. So apologies for those of you who knew a great deal about Gandhi for this basic summary of his CV. Now, Gandhi is called the father of the nation, conventionally in India. But I regard him also as the mother of all arguments about India. He was a deeply original thinker. He never went to university, so his university was the University of Life. But he had some most interesting and unusual things to say about a variety of themes. And there are three themes, three compelling social and political themes in which Gandhi initiated arguments that continue till this day, which I'm going to unfold before you. In the spirit of your observance of the International Day of Peace and Nonviolence, and in the spirit of this being a center for civic engagement. So I'm going to outline to you three debates Gandhi played a central role in shaping. The first debate had to do with how best to achieve justice from political oppression. The debate between those who preferred using violent armed struggle, as for example the American Revolution did, or the French Revolution did, and those who, and contrary to that, Gandhi advocated non-violence as a means of political redressal. The second debate has to do with social justice. Professor Kumar mentioned the question of race. In India, race is the fundamental axis. Well, there are two fundamental axes of social inequality in your country, race and gender. In India, there are two fundamental axes of social inequality. One, of course, is gender, and the other is caste, which is structurally very similar to race. The Hindu social order is divided into 4 castes and a 5th caste, which is even below the established caste system. And this 5th caste, which is about 15% of the population, was essentially regarded as untouchable. So the caste system, in its prejudice, in its hierarchy, in its forms of stigmatization, is very similar to the system of race operating in North America. And Gandhi played a very important role in seeking to end caste injustice. So there's non-violence, there's social justice, and the third theme of Gandhi's debates that I'm going to outline to you today is the theme of interfaith harmony. So caste and gender divided India horizontally, like that. Religion and language divided India vertically. India was a land of many languages and of many religions, the two most important of which were Hindus and Muslims. And Gandhi, among other things, spent a great deal of his time and expended a great deal of his political and moral capital in seeking to bring about harmony between Hindus and Muslims. So those are the three debates I'm going to outline to you sequentially. Begin with non-violence. In 1909, when Gandhi was a community activist in South Africa, he went to England, which was the imperial capital, to lobby for the rights of the Indians in South Africa. Shortly before he reached England, there had been a violent incident in which an Indian student in England had assassinated a British colonial official. So there was a party. So sort of think of a room, a student center at Hofstra. There's a party for Indian students, British officials, and one Indian student took out a gun and shot dead one of the visiting British officials. And when Gandhi reached London, he found many of the Indian students there were greatly admiring of this act. They thought this was just revenge for British racial oppression, and they believed that the way to get the British out of India was to blow the hell out of them. And Gandhi was deeply appalled by this. On the ship back to South Africa, he wrote a famous political tract called Hind Swaraj, which is still in print in this country, published by Cambridge University Press. It's essentially a defense of non-violence. And it's an argument that non-violence is both morally preferable as well as more practicable. If violence presumes for shall we say, for an oppressed African or Indian to kill a British official through violent means, violence presumes that the person committing the act of violence is 100% right and the person who is being killed is 100% wrong. It rests on a total certitude. Whereas Gandhi believed that it's always possible to start a debate, a conversation with your oppressor, to make the oppressor see the injustice of his ways, and if the oppressor does not see the injustice of his ways, to apply pressure through non-violent civil disobedience. And Hind Swaraj, written in 1909, is a philosophical defense on non-violence, and is conducted in a very interesting manner. So, as I said, Gandhi was in London, and in London he had these conversations with Indians who were full of fiery enthusiasm about this act, was this single murder that had been committed on British soil, and were hopeful that this would presage dozens of other such political assassinations in India. So that in India, colonial magistrates, generals, white principals of Indian colleges, judges would be shot dead. And this would lead to a mass uprising that would, of course, then deliver India into freedom. And this enchantment that young men had for violence as a means, as a form of anti-colonial resistance, got a massive impetus in 1917 with the victory of the Soviet Revolution. And a lot of young Indians, young, idealistic, passionate, idealistic, patriotic Indians, were completely bowled over by the Russian Revolution. There was a workers' leader in Bombay called S.A. Dange, who was once very famous in India. And he wrote a tract in 1920 called Lenin versus Gandhi, arguing that Lenin was more dynamic, more progressive, more revolutionary than Gandhi. And compared to Lenin, Gandhi was a weak-kneed, feminized, pusillanimous reformist. So Gandhi comes back to India and has to carry on these debates about violence versus non-violence. In the 1920s, there was a rise of anarchist revolutionary violence in India, particularly in the province of Bengal, which is in the east, and the province of Punjab, which is in the west. There was a Punjabi revolutionary, still much admired in India, called Bhagat Singh. And in 1929, Bhagat Singh assassinated a police officer, or was at least involved in the assassination of a police officer in his hometown Lahore, which of course is now in Pakistan. Then it was in undivided India. And shortly afterwards, Bhagat Singh threw a bomb in the imperial secretariat in Delhi. And then he was jailed and sent to death row. And he became a great figure of admiration and hope among young Indians. They admired his daring, his courage, his fearlessness. He was also a very well-read man. If you look at his prison diaries, he's reading Adam Smith, Karl Marx, Tolstoy. So he was a very unusual and remarkable man. But he had this commitment to violence. And Gandhi, while admiring Bhagat Singh's idealism, his patriotism, absolutely dissented from his views. And he wrote an essay much more important than his book Hind Swaraj, but unfortunately neglected by scholars, an essay that is of timeless relevance. This essay was called The Cult of the Bomb, and it's an answer to Bhagat Singh. People like Bhagat Singh, and I'm going to just read out some excerpts from this essay that Gandhi wrote, disparaging the cult of the bomb. Gandhi put forward two practical rather than moral arguments against the use of violence. So he opposed violence not merely in terms of pacifism and the reluctance to take life, but also on pragmatic grounds. He said, violence leads to increasing repression by the rulers. Every time violence has occurred in India, British military expenditure has risen. Secondly, said Gandhi, a cult of violence ultimately turned on the society that breeds it. For from violence done to the foreign ruler, violence to our own people, whom we may consider to be obstructing the country's progress, is an easy, natural step. I'll repeat. From violence done to the foreign ruler, violence to our own people, whom we may consider to be obstructing the country's progress, is an easy, natural step. I mean, this is a prophetic remark, because that's exactly what happened in the Russian Revolution. The Soviet communists kicked out the Tsar, and then Stalin turned the violence on his own comrades. That's what happened in Mao's China. That's what happened in Ho Chi Minh's Vietnam. That's what happened in Algeria, where a civil law continues to this day. So it's a prophetic remark that from violence done to the foreign ruler, violence to our own people, whom the political leadership thinks is antithetical to them, is an easy next step. Therefore, said Gandhi, it does not require much intellectual effort to see that if we resort to violence, we shall just add to our difficulties and postpone the day of freedom. Seeking to drive out Englishmen through violence, wrote Gandhi in this 1930 essay, The Cult of the Bomb, seeking to drive out Englishmen through violence would lead not to independence but to utter confusion. We can establish independence only by adjusting our differences through an appeal to the head and the heart, by evolving organic unity amongst ourselves, not by terrorizing or killing those whom we fancy may impede our march. Now, Gandhi he ended his essay by offering as an alternative to the cult of a bomb, a program of mass civil disobedience, for which one had to cultivate an ethic of non-violence, where collectively, patiently, you put pressure on the rulers to change their racist laws. And it's very interesting that shortly after Bhagat Singh, there was a cult of Bhagat Singh, and he wrote this essay. He launched the Salt March. The Salt March was an exemplary act of mass civil disobedience, where a colonial law prohibiting Indians from making this essential commodity for their survival, was breached by thousands of Indians marching to the sea. And effectively, the Salt March essentially began the end of the British Empire, because the moral justification of the British Empire ended with this mass show of civil disobedience all across the Indian coastline, north, south, east and west. Now, all this is moderately well known. What is not, and what I found in the archives in Gandhi's hometown in Ahmedabad, is that Gandhi's essay, The Cult of the Bomb, sparked a response from the colleagues of Bhagat Singh. Bhagat Singh was in prison, but his party, the Hindustan Socialist Republican Army, wrote a counter critique and posted it to Gandhi's ashram in Ahmedabad. This pamphlet began with a stirring evocation of the revolutionary credo. Independence, it said, can come only through armed struggle. The revolutionaries saw the advent of the revolution in the restlessness of the youth, and they wrote, as our desire for freedom grows, the infuriated youth will begin to kill the oppressors. Violence was necessary, said these revolutionaries, because it instills fear in the hearts of the oppressors. It brings hopes of revenge and redemption to the oppressed masses. It gives courage and self-confidence to the wavering. It shatters the spell of the superiority of the ruling classes and raises the status of the subject race in the eyes of the world. So, you need violence to give yourself confidence, to instill fear in your pressure, to remove the veil from ordinary masses that they can't emancipate themselves. So if you read this pamphlet, it's actually, to me, it sounds very Marxist and very jihadi. It's the kind of language that Tamil Tigers, Syrian revolutionaries, Palestinians, Kashmiris have often used. Kashmiri revolutionaries have often used, and of course Marxists have often used. Namely, but yet, if you look at the history of all these places, violence has only bred more violence. That's what happened in Sri Lanka. That's what happened in the Middle East. That's what happened everywhere. That's what's happened in Palestine, where, as a means of bringing about social transformation, as a means of ending colonial or authoritarian oppression, you use violence. It only led to a cycle of counter-violence. And there's so many examples to validate Gandhi, the American Civil Rights Movement, which succeeded through non-violence. The revolutions in Eastern Europe in the late 1980s that led to the fall of the Berlin Wall were based on non-violence. The Philippines, the overthrow of Marcos, other parts of Southeast Asia. There's a study by a New York think tank called Freedom House, which argues that 80% of the successful transitions to democracy in the 20th century have happened through non-violent, peaceful struggle. So the point of what I'm trying to say is that Gandhi's defense of non-violence was not merely moral and ethical. It was that too. It was pragmatic as well. Now, can non-violence work everywhere at all times? For example, would non-violence have worked against colonial power more brutal than the British? I mentioned Ho Chi Minh, the great Vietnamese nationalist. In 1956, Ho Chi Minh visited New Delhi. And he joked in a casual conversation. He went, as all foreign visitors, including President Obama, are taken to the Gandhi Memorial in Delhi, where he was cremated and where there's a memorial to him. Your current president hasn't been taken there yet, but that's because he hasn't come. I'm not sure he'd want to go there, but that's a separate question. So Ho Chi Minh was taken there to the Gandhi Memorial. And he said, if Mahatma Gandhi had been fighting the French, he would have given up non-violence within a week. because the French were a much more brutal, oppressive colonial power than the British. The British had a sense of guilt. You could stoke that guilt. It also helped that Gandhi's struggle for freedom was greatly enabled and supported by the left-wing British Labour Party. Just as very similar to Martin Luther King's struggle being supported by white liberals, which gave it a certain credibility and legitimacy. There were enough American whites who felt guilty about this, right? So, this is one question that must be posed about nonviolence. Could it have worked against a more oppressive colonial power? The second question about nonviolence that was posed in Gandhi's own lifetime is, would it have worked against Hitler? Gandhi actually suggested when the Second World War broke out that the Jews should resist Hitler nonviolently. And this suggestion, casual suggestion, he didn't develop it with any great philosophical thoroughness, but he made it in passing, and it was published in his magazine as a short note. It attracted the attention of the great Jewish theologian Martin Buber, who wrote a brilliant critique of Gandhi's defense of nonviolence and said that it just can't work against Hitler. So if the ruler, the oppressor, is so absolutely heartless, is so cruel, is so unforgiving, is absolutely incapable of remorse or self-reflection, will nonviolence work? That's one question that I think remains from Gandhi's defense of nonviolence. So that's the first debate I wanted to talk to you about. The second debate is about social justice and the abolition of untouchability in particular. Now, I spoke about the caste system. So the caste system, there are four orders. There are Brahmins, who were traditionally priests, Kshatriyas, who were traditionally warriors and landlords, Baniyas, who were traditionally merchants, Shudras, who were traditionally labor workers and artisans, and untouchables, who were scavengers and carrion pickers and did the most degrading tasks. Gandhi was a Baniya born in the third strata. So technically he was upper caste because the first three castes are recognized as upper caste. And he was a guilt-ridden upper caste reformer. Gandhi came back to India in 1915 from South Africa, and he spent the first year merely traveling around India. He had been away from his homeland for 20 years, and he felt he must rediscover it. So he took a vow imposed on him by his political mentor Gopal Krishna Gokhale that for 1 year he would just travel. So he just took a train all across India, looking, learning, listening, observing. And he was horrified at the practice of untouchability. Because in the diaspora, caste distinctions were not so marked. But at home they were, in the villages they were. The untouchables had to live outside the main village. They could not draw water from the same well. They were excluded from village schools. Upper caste landlords would eye their women. He saw all of this, and he was horrified by this, and decided to launch a countrywide campaign against untouchability. And he famously said in 1920 that India will not be free for freedom from British rule if it so grossly oppresses a section of its own population. That the ending of untouchability was mandatory to achieving political freedom. Now, Gandhi's critique of untouchability, his campaign against untouchability, was sharply attacked by the Hindu priesthood. Because untouchability was part of Hindu scriptures, not just a social practice, but the holy texts of Hinduism defended the practice of untouchability. And the Hindu priesthood told Gandhi, as a middle caste, as a Baniya rather than as a Brahmin, and as someone who knows no Sanskrit, you have no business at all asking us to reform our system. So he was bitterly attacked by right-wing Hindus, and there were even attempts on his life by right-wing Hindus for his work in ending untouchability. So that was, the Hindu orthodoxy thought Gandhi was a dangerous radical messing around with scripture and tradition. On the other side, They were leaders of the untouchables themselves, who criticized Gandhi for being too slow, for being a timid reformist. And the greatest of these untouchable leaders, who sadly is completely missing in Attenborough's film, was a very great thinker and activist called B.R. Ambedkar. I should tell you a little bit about him because apart from Gandhi, he was the greatest modern Indian. Gandhi was born in an upper caste in 1869. Ambedkar was born in an untouchable home 23 years later. So he's much younger than Gandhi. He was a Christian missionary. He was normally someone like Ambedkar, the 13th child of an untouchable soldier, would never have got an education. But a Christian missionary recognized the boy's precocious intelligence, gave him a scholarship which allowed him to complete his matriculation. Whereupon a progressive prince, the Maharaja of Baroda, who was almost the only Indian prince opposed to untouchability, gave him a further scholarship to come to Columbia University. And Ambedkar comes to Columbia University shortly before the First World War. Is inspired by the great American philosopher Thomas Dewey, takes a degree, takes an MA, does a PhD in Columbia, then goes to London and takes a second PhD in the London School of Economics, also qualifies for the British Bar, and returns to India as the first person of an untouchable background to have remotely this kind of qualification. And he becomes a full-time activist for the untouchable cause. And he engages with Gandhi. From 1930 onwards, Gandhi and Ambedkar have a very, very intense and heated debate. And they both change, and Gandhi changes more than Ambedkar. So, very briefly, when Gandhi decided to attack untouchability, mindful of the fact that he was disturbing the Hindu caste order, aware that the Hindu priestly orthodoxy had their guns out for him, he was hesitant in attacking the caste system as a whole. So he said, untouchability is bad, and we should oppose it, for example, by going together to worship. So untouchables were not allowed to enter Hindu temples. And Gandhi played a very important role in the 1920s and 30s in organizing what was called a temple entry program, where people of different castes, including untouchables, hand in hand went into the temple and they were beaten back by the police because the law said the priests decide who can enter and who can't. They were beaten back, they suffered awful injuries, they were jailed, but ultimately, after 12 years of protest, the temples were opened. But while advocating temple entry, Gandhi still would not advocate intermarriage. He said, no, let different castes marry within themselves. It'll be probably too much of a radical disturbance to advocate intermarriage. And it was the persistent critique of Ambedkar that pushed Gandhi towards a more critical, radical position, so that late in his life, he also began to advocate intermarriage. There was, apart from the fact, there were several differences between Ambedkar and Gandhi. One was that Gandhi's understanding of untouchability was intellectual and philosophical. Ambedkar's was personal and experiential. He was born in an untouchable home, and he understood what it meant to be discriminated against from the depths of his being. The second reason was, you could say, sociological. Gandhi felt that through patient persuasion, through temple entry movements, he could persuade his fellow Hindus to stop the practice of untouchability. Ambedkar, on the other hand, believed that untouchability was part of the DNA of Hinduism. You could not reform Hinduism. Hinduism was incapable of the kind of thoroughgoing reform that would lead to the elimination of caste practices, because everything in the religion, from whom you ate with, whom you married with, whom you shared a house with, where you worked, what profession you could undertake what profession you were prohibited from undertaking was encoded in the caste system. In 1935, there was an attack on untouchables in a village in Western India, a savage, sort of like a lynching kind of attack. And Ambedkar was appalled by it. And he said after that, Hindus are incapable of reforming themselves. Despite what Gandhi is saying and despite what Gandhi is trying to do, Hindus as a whole are incapable of reforming themselves. They are castes through and through. And he said after this attack, I was born a Hindu, but I will not die a Hindu. And when he said this, what he meant was, I will convert to some other faith that is less hierarchical, less unequal than Hinduism. And once Ambedkar made this remark, missionaries of many other faiths sought to convert him. So Christian missionaries made a beeline to his door. Sikh missionaries went and met him. Muslim missionaries also met him. Now, interestingly, and I suppose tragically, Islam, in theory, does not practice caste discrimination. Anyone can enter a mosque. But in practice in India, Indian Muslims have absorbed Hindu caste distinctions. So, if you are a Muslim converted from a noble family, you will never even break bread with a Muslim converted from an artisan family. In theory, Christians do not practice caste. But in practice, Christians in India practice caste. Even today in Goa, where conversion took place 400 years ago, you will meet families proudly telling you, I am converted from a Brahmin family. In parts of Kerala, till about 50 years ago, working class Christians were not allowed to worship inside a church. They had to worship from the veranda. So Ambedkar observed all this and said, no, I don't want to take my flock, my followers, to a religion which pretends to community equality, but in practice reproduces all the worst aspects of the caste system. Finally, late in life, he decided to become a Buddhist. Now, Buddhism was originated in India, but had left India. There was a kind of Hindu counter-revival, which in the 7th and 8th centuries, whereby the Buddhists had to go, and they spread their wings in Southeast Asia. But by the time Ambedkar embraced Buddhism, there were just a handful of Buddhists in India. And he decided in 1956, 20 years after saying, I will not die a Hindu, he finally chose to become a Buddhist. Tragically, 6 weeks after his conversion, he died. Supposing, for the sake of argument, Ambedkar had become a Buddhist in 1935, quite possibly millions of people would have followed him in the 20 years of public and political life that he had left. And an egalitarian religion like Buddhism would have flourished in a way in which it may have reformed Hindus much more in a much more thoroughgoing way than has actually happened. So that's the debate on social equality that Gandhi had, principally with B.R. Ambedkar. The debate on violence was with, as I said, with the Marxists and with the armed struggle revolutionaries. I'm now going to come very quickly to the third debate major debate that Gandhi engaged in, the debate of interfaith harmony. I think this is a debate that shows Gandhi in some ways at his most admirable and noble. I talked about how Gandhi was rescued from political obscurity by an invitation from South Africa. What I didn't tell you was that the two merchants who were fighting were Gujarati, but they were Muslims. Gandhi was a Hindu. So he takes a ship in 1893 to Durban, and he gets off the ship and goes to the home of his client, who's a Muslim, and stays there with that Muslim, which would have been inconceivable back home in India. A Hindu and a Muslim, even for a few days, sharing a home, eating from the same plates. His first clients are Muslims. When he starts his struggle against the discriminatory laws imposed on Indians by the white colonists, the first funder of his movement is a Parsi, Then he moves to Johannesburg and he befriends a series of Jews, white Jews, who were dissidents, also Jews who were excluded by the dominant white Christian ethos of South Africa. And there were several remarkable Jews who are in some ways the subsidiary heroes of my book, Gandhi Before India, which Dr. Kumar mentioned. There was a Jew called Pollack, Henry Pollack, whom Gandhi met in a vegetarian restaurant because they were both vegetarians. And they hit it off, they became best friends. Pollack was in love with a Christian girl called Millie in England. Pollack was an English Jew and his family had sent him to South Africa so that he could not marry his Christian girlfriend. And this is 1904, 1905, and Pollack meets Gandhi, befriends him, unburdens himself of his sense of anguish at being separated from his beloved. Gandhi, an Indian Hindu, writes a series of letters to Pollack's father and persuades him to let the couple be reunited. Millie Pollack comes. This is actually very moving. I mean, you think of the times, 1905, right? When there was so much religious prejudice around the world, even more than there is now. So Millie Graham is given permission to come. She lands in Cape Town. Henry and Gandhi are there to receive her. They go to the registrar's office. The registrar says, I need a lawyer as a witness. So this Christian and Jew get married with a Hindu as their witness. And then they share a home. They share a home. I mean, it's if you can think of an interracial couple in Johannesburg in 1905. Johannesburg was the most racist city in the most racist country in the world. And the Pollacks and the Gandhis are sharing a home. There's a beautiful memoir by Millie Pollack called Mr. Gandhi the Man. You may still get it on eBay or Abe Books. It's a beautiful book because it describes their life together, including, of course, full of love and admiration for Gandhi because Gandhi allowed Millie to marry Henry, admiration for his courage, his principle, but also criticisms of his patriarchy, about how he treats his wife. And this English woman, Millie Pollack, is arguing in this home with this Indian male and curing him of at least some of his patriarchal prejudices. So that's Gandhi's life in South Africa. Muslim clients, Parsi patrons, Jewish friends. His first civil disobedience movements, the meetings are held in mosques. Hindus, Muslims, Christians, the meetings held in mosques. It's outside one of those mosques, the Hamidia Mosque in Johannesburg, which still stands, where the famous incident of burning those racial certificates is conducted. So that's what Gandhi learns in the diaspora. What the diaspora does to Gandhi is to make him a thoroughgoing religious pluralist, which he would not have been if he had been a successful lawyer in Bombay. All his clients would have been Gujarati Hindus, his friends, his social circle, those he hung out with would have been from the same community, the same caste. So it's the diaspora that makes him a capacious cosmopolitan. And he takes this message back to India. And from the time he returns to India, till his death, a bedrock of his political creed is India does not belong to Hindus. India belongs equally to everyone who resides here, regardless of their religious or linguistic or cultural or ethnic affiliation. My book has a great deal on his efforts to promote Hindu-Muslim harmony, not all of which were successful. But let me just very briefly say that Gandhi's philosophy of interfaith harmony and religious pluralism was sharply attacked by Muslims and by Hindus. So the Muslims who attacked it were led by the person I mentioned, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who felt that if India became free from British rule, the Hindus would be in a majority, and in a united country, the Hindus would capture all the top jobs, and the Muslims therefore needed a homeland of their own. So that was Jinnah's perspective, where he was finally able to persuade the British that when they left, they should give the Muslim League a separate Muslim homeland called Pakistan. Pakistan was created in August 1947. It was created against the backdrop of a bloody civil war in which 1 million people died and some 10 million people were displaced. And although Gandhi failed in stopping partition, although his lifelong dream of an independent and united India did not come to fruition, his true moral greatness was revealed when partition happened and he did whatever he could to stem the blood that was being shed. So he first goes in 1946, just before partition, to eastern Bengal, to the district of Noakhali. You think of this, he's 77. It's very inhospitable terrain. This is a time there are no roads. This is kind of a deltaic region with acute malaria, which you can see suffers from. And he walks in Noakhali, Noakhali was a Muslim majority area in which Hindus had been the main victims. Gandhi treks to Noakhali trying to give confidence and self-respect to the Hindus. While he's in Noakhali, he hears that in Bihar, which is a province slightly to the north, savage violence is broken out against Muslims because Hindus are in a majority. Then he goes there and he carries on his peace mission there. A 77-year-old man armed only with the power of his moral courage. Then he moves to Calcutta, the greatest Indian city, and through two fasts is able to bring about peace between Hindus and Muslims in Calcutta. From Calcutta he moves to Delhi, where he does the same thing. He goes on a fast. While Gandhi is fasting, his main hope or his main endeavor after partition has taken place is to tell the Muslims and the Christians, particularly Muslims, but also the Christians who are still in India, is that whatever Pakistan does to its religious minorities, because in Pakistan there had been an almost complete ethnic purging of their minorities, the Hindus and the Sikhs, and Gandhi is telling the Muslims of India that whatever Pakistan does, we will give you equal rights. In Calcutta and in Delhi, he succeeds in bringing about social peace and succeeds in convincing the large Muslim populations of those cities that they need not flee in fear to Pakistan. That he is mindful of the rights and the insecurities of the minorities in Pakistan as well. And when he completes this successful fast in Delhi in late January, once he recovers, he says, I'll go across the border to Pakistan. And in Lahore and Karachi, I'll try and bring about the same kind of interfaith harmony. Before he can, he's killed. He's murdered by a Hindu fundamentalist, angry for what he is doing to protect the rights of religious minorities in India. So, there are other debates that Gandhi initiated, which I don't have time to really explore in my talk today, but my book talks about it. For example, gender, what were his views on the emancipation of women, race, how Gandhi began as a racist in South Africa but gradually shed his racial prejudices. Environmentalism, Gandhi was a precocious environmentalist who warned about unbridled greed and consumerism. So he was a most original and innovative thinker across a variety of subjects and themes, of which I focused on 3 today. How relevant are Gandhi's ideas in 70 years after his death? How relevant, for example, is his philosophy of nonviolence? In my view, nonviolence is absolutely and fundamentally relevant while fighting for justice through political means in any democracy. There is no moral or ethical or indeed pragmatic justification for an oppressed class of Americans to pick up guns or an oppressed class of Indians to pick up guns, because there are enough means of redressal through the democratic system. And as Gandhi's movement and King's movement showed, if you organize collectively, you can shame the rulers into conceding your demands. However, as with Hitler, it's possible that in some brutally authoritarian states, non-violence is not possible. I mean, I can't answer. Obviously, from an ethical and moral standpoint, one would prefer all struggles to be non-violent. But how would you oppose the rule of, the North Korean dictator, for example? If you're a Korean Democrat who wants freedom and democracy and justice in North Korea, could you get rid of him by squatting on the street, by blocking the railway line, by surrounding parliament peacefully and non-violently? You could do it in Eastern Europe. Many revolutions in Eastern Europe happened that way. But could you do it in North Korea? But in any society which has a modicum of democracy and political freedom, non-violence is not just the more ethical means, but also almost always the more practical means. And there's a compelling illustration of this in my own country, India. I spoke about the former untouchables, who are now called Dalits, and their discrimination against them. I spoke about the fact that women, gender is also a second axis of discrimination. But in fact, in India, the most discriminated group of citizens are not untouchables, not women, but indigenous people or tribals, and who are very large in numbers. They are about 8% of India's population. They live in the central Indian heartland. They suffer from what I've called a triple resource curse. A triple resource curse in that the tribals of India live amidst India's richest forests, alongside India's fastest flowing rivers, and on top of India's most lucrative mineral resources. And as India is industrialized and modernized and developed, the tribals have been dispossessed and thrown off the land. They have no political voice. They are even poorer than the erstwhile untouchables. They have no access to education, health. They are really the most oppressed section of Indian society. Now, the tribal cause has been taken up over the last 30 years by Marxist revolutionaries known as the Naxalites, who have sought to emancipate the tribals through armed struggle, by killing policemen, officials, by setting landmines to intimidate the government. And this has only provoked a savage cycle of repression by the state. And the tribals have been squeezed in between the violence of the Marxist revolutionaries and the violence of the state. Whereas, if you'd had idealistic Gandhians go to the tribals and mobilize them through collective non-violent struggle, I believe you'd have had much more progress than you've had so far. So, I think Gandhi's philosophy of non-violence in any reasonably open political system remains the best, the most efficient, and also the most moral means of bringing about justice. Second, what about Gandhi's approach to the abolition of untouchability? This is a large and complicated subject dealt with at great length in my book. Suffice it to say that 2 or 3 things. First, that when there is a system of structured inequality, such as race or gender or caste, that system of structured inequality needs to be challenged from below and from above. If you look at the history of feminism, the suffragette movement, European feminism, I don't know that much about American feminism, right? In the 1870s, John Stuart Mill, who was a male liberal thinker, made an argument for female suffrage. That was taken up by women, and it took 20 odd years of protest. But there were enough embellished, guilt-ridden males in the British House of Commons to grant suffrage, pressurized from below. Likewise, if you look at the history of the civil rights movement here, civil rights legislation happened through a combination of pressure by excluded blacks from below and some kind of belated awakening by a small section of powerful white politicians. So that's the first thing I'd like to say, that to end a system of structured inequality, you need pressure from below and from above. And in that respect, India was lucky to have both Gandhi and Ambedkar. History made them antagonists. They approached the problem in different ways. But you needed both of them to act, to undermine, both in a moral as well as legal sense, the pernicious practice of untouchability. Though, of course, rightly so, for untouchables today, former untouchables, Ambedkar is a much greater hero than Gandhi because he was one of their own. Finally, on interfaith harmony, I think this is in many ways the least appreciated and possibly also the most enduringly relevant of Gandhi's legacies to us today. In the world we live in today, riven by so much misunderstanding, hatred, violence between people of different faiths. In 1919, Gandhi organized his first major struggle in India, known as the Roller Satyagraha. And while organizing it, he asked every participant in that struggle against British rule to take a vow. And I'm going to read out the vow that Gandhi asked Hindus and Muslims, India's two major religious communities, to take in 1919, 100 years ago. This is the vow, I read, quote, with God as witness, we Hindus and Muslims declare that we shall behave towards one another as children of the same parents, that we shall have no differences, that the sorrows of each will be the sorrows of the other, and that each shall help the other in removing these sorrows. We shall respect each other's religion and religious feelings, and shall not stand in the way of our respective religious practices. We shall always refrain from violence to each other in the name of religion. This is what Gandhi asked of Hindus and Muslims in India in 1919. I wish there was a Gandhi around to ask the same thing of Hindus and Muslims in India in 2019. But the same question can and must be asked of Jews and Arabs in the Middle East today, or of Christians and Muslims in 100 different parts of the world at 100 different points in history. Thank you very much. I'd love to take some questions if you have time. Yeah. Sure.
As I mentioned before, I'm fascinated with this relationship between Gandhi and Ambedkar. And I've noticed that there is a kind of, I don't know if it's a resurgence, but an ongoing interest, I guess particularly not only in Dalit communities, but around the world. There's Ambedkar societies. I was in Nova Scotia a couple of years ago, and there was one there. And I think that sort of engaged Buddhism, I guess, is a kind of post-Ambedkar legacy. But I was fascinated to see how that, when most people have not even heard of him, we know Gandhi, of course, or maybe, and Indians certainly know him as the father of the Indian Constitution.
Right.
But I'm fascinated by this sort of grassroots impact that he has had, and I guess the legacy is partially a Buddhist one as well. But and I do remember seeing this film where, at his death, millions of Dalits converted to Buddhism.
Correct.
So I guess that impact has spread now kind of around the world. I wondered if you could comment on that.
Yeah, thank you. Ambedkar was a truly great thinker. Unfortunately, he's been reduced to merely a Dalit or untouchable thinker. He was actually a great constitutionalist and a moral figure and a Democrat. So I'll just quote from his last speech to the Constituent Assembly, while he was introducing the Indian Constitution, which he didn't fully draft, but he played an important role. I mean, it's mistaken to call him the author of the Indian Constitution because there were many hands, but he kind of was the curator, you could say, of the Indian Constitution. But in the last speech he made while introducing the Constitution to the Parliament, he made a series of prophetic remarks, and I'm going to quote you just two, which are really relevant to my country and not just to my country, to democracies everywhere. The first remark he made was this. He said, with this constitution, we will become one person, one vote, because India had taken the revolutionary step for a poor, illiterate country of giving the vote to everyone, regardless of class or gender. He said, with this constitution, we will become one person, one vote. But when will be a society of one person, one value? Right, now, which meant in everyday life, how you treat Dalits or blacks or women or gays or religious minorities. When will we become one person, one value? And that's a question Americans and Indians and Brits and everyone needs to ask. The other remark that Ambedkar made in his last speech is even more prophetic, particularly with regard to my country, but maybe not only my country. He said he warned against the cult of personality. He said, Bhakti is religious devotion. Bhakti is a Indian word for religious devotion. So he said, Bhakti in religion is a route to the salvation of the soul. For example, the mystical tradition in Christianity, where you worship a particular medieval saint, or in India you worship the god Krishna. That's Bhakti. So Bhakti in religion may be a route to the salvation of the soul, but Bhakti in politics is a route to eventual dictatorship. And then he went on to say, however great a person's contributions to their nation, you must never lay down your liberties at their feet. India today is captured by a cult of personality. The cult of personality in India today is the largest cult of personality in any democracy in human history. Maybe Mao's cult of personality was bigger, possibly, right? And Trump would like to create a cult of personality. So would Boris Johnson, so would Putin, and it's a prophetic remark. However great an individual's contributions to a nation, you must never lay down your liberties at their feet, because Bhakti in religion is a route to the salvation of the soul, but Bhakti in politics is a route to dictatorship. So thank you.
So, as Gandhi was educated in the West, in London, I was wondering to what extent Western literature had on him. I know, for example, he was influenced by civil disobedience, and judging from Gandhi's life, it seems like he was a natural law theorist. So, do you have any information? Natural law theorist? Natural law is the idea that, to what extent did this literature and did these theories have on Gandhi?
It's a very good question. Gandhi was profoundly influenced by Western thought. You could think of his moral philosophy as, he was a experimenter. So he called his book, The Story of My Experiments with Truth. He was taking from here and there and making his own synthesis, his own compost, as you were, most relevant to what was going on. He took a little bit from Hinduism, quite a lot from Jaina philosophy. Jains are a small Indian community that exalt non-violence. So his non-violence, ethical restraint came from Jainism. The Western thinkers who influenced him were Tolstoy, whose idea that the kingdom of God is within you. You don't listen to what the bishop says, you follow your own conscience. That comes from Tolstoy. Also, Tolstoy preached a kind of pacifism. Also, Tolstoy, like Gandhi, was an upper-class man who worked with his hands. Why did Gandhi spin? Why did Gandhi clean his own latrine? Because he wanted to break down the boundaries between mental labor, which only the upper caste or the aristocrats did, and manual labor, which the working class did. So Tolstoy was a profound influencer. So was John Ruskin, who was an English radical critic of industrialization. However, it's a misconception that he was influenced by civil disobedience. That's not true. It's common, but it's not true. What actually happened was, he thought about civil disobedience on his own. Gandhi was not a pretty well-read man. He had not read civil disobedience. In 1906, in fact, on 11 September 1906, which is 95 years before the other 9/11, in a large theatre in Johannesburg, he thought of resisting racial laws non-violently. And in 1907, 1908, he successfully organized non-violent protests. And after the first series of non-violent protests, an English friend gave him Thoreau's tract Civil Disobedience to read. after he had developed his own theory, and then he saw it as validation. He said, look, I did all this, even this great American says this is the right path. But he didn't get from Thoreau. And of course, one difference between Thoreau and Gandhi was that Thoreau's civil disobedience was individual, whereas Gandhi's was collective. But beyond the influence of Western thinkers on Gandhi is the extraordinary fact that he was absolutely free from any kind of racial hatred or prejudice. He opposed British imperial rule, but he often said, I have love in my heart for every individual Englishman. His closest friend was an English Christian priest called Charles Frew Andrews. So he was in an age full of replete with national and racial pride. He's a model because he takes from everyone. All he says is, give me something that promotes tolerance, non-violence, peace. And if Christianity can give, he's a great admirer of the Sermon on the Mount. As I said, his closest friends were Jews. But the Western thinkers who influenced him were really Tolstoy and Ruskin, not Thoreau. He read Thoreau later and found validation in Thoreau. Yeah, sir. You would like to come up?
Oh, okay. Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to reading your recent book on how Gandhi changed the world. So I have a very brief two-part question. I'm not sure if I remember the premise accurately. Somewhere I think I read that Gandhi wrote so much that his own writings would account for 60 volumes, 500 pages each. So the two-part question is that essentially accurate? And secondly, how have you navigated that as a scholar?
Well, the first part of your question, that's an underestimate. The collected works of Gandhi run to 97 volumes. It was a magnificent piece of editorial scholarship, inconceivable in the India of today. In the 1950s and 60s. So first of all, Gandhi was a writer. And he wrote in 3 languages, English, Gujarati, and Hindi. And he was a stylist, at least in 2 of them, English and Gujarati. He edited a newspaper for many years. And the collected works have all his articles, his speeches, his letters, and everything. And they go to 97 volumes. Right. The second part is, when I wrote my 2-part biography, I did it because I knew that the collected works of Gandhi had to be merely the starting point. Most scholars who write on Gandhi just order those 100 volumes which are online and write a whole book on Gandhi from those 100 volumes. You could. You could write on Gandhi and caste, Gandhi and religion, Gandhi and non-violence, just following the arc of his own writings and his own life. But as a biographer, I knew that a study of a human being has to be many-sided from different perspectives. The collected works have what Gandhi said, but not what Gandhi wrote to Nehru, but what Nehru wrote to Gandhi. The collected works don't have what other people said about Gandhi. The collected works don't have all the unpublished secret British intelligence reports about Gandhi. The collected works don't have all the newspaper accounts about Gandhi and what he did and the controversy around him. So what I try to do in my book, which is why it's so fat, and which is why I hope it gives a fuller perspective than books based only on the collected works, is to say the collected works are an essential starting point. But that's all. You have to have a many-sided approach, using many different kind of perspectives, fleshing in all kinds of characters. That's what I've tried to do. Any last questions? Yeah. Go ahead. Come. I'd be happy to take more questions.
So Gandhi has many ideals which can be regarded as profoundly democratic, but does this mean that Gandhi was absolutely in favor of democracy? What kind of vision did he have for a political system, if any?
So, first of all, I'd say that there were aspects in which Gandhi was not democratic. How he treated his wife and children, for example. he was absolute. Called him a patriarch, and that was particularly true the way he dealt with his wife and children. He was not rather overbearing father. Gandhi, early in life, he opposed the British parliamentary system. Later on, he became agnostic about it. So when the Indian Constitution was being forged in the 1940s, he was alive and said, fine, you go ahead and frame your, which is what we did. We framed a multi-party democracy. He did not get into the debates about whether it should be proportional representation or whatever, right? So he did. However, he had 2 or 3 philosophical ideas about democracy. He didn't think very much about the constitutional, legal, structural, organizational, representational aspects about democracy. But there were, I'd say, 3 philosophical ideas he had, which were very important, which I think are entirely relevant. One is that a state should not be too centralized. Gandhi would have wanted much more power given to village councils and town councils. Today in India, everything is controlled from the state capital. Is the legislature, he would have liked a devolution of political power towards decentralized political authority in village councils, and he talks about this. That's the first thing. The second thing is, if it's often asked, what if Gandhi had lived another 10 years? If he wasn't murdered by a Hindu fundamentalist, what would he have done? My view is, Gandhi always recognized that civil society had to act as a check on the state. What Tocqueville famously called voluntary associations. In India, when India became independent, all authority, legitimacy, responsibility was outsourced to the ministers, the politicians, the parliamentarians. Every day, ordinary people did not take their life in their own hands. So we don't have really a civil society movement where people organize in communities on environment, water, X, Y, Z. So Gandhi always, if Gandhi had lived another 10 years, he would have told his followers, let there be elections, let there be a parliament, let there be a government where there are ministers for home and law and justice and defense, but let citizens be eternally vigilant and active to check the excesses of those in power. So if there is a law against untouchability and the ministry does not enact that law, let's organize a street protest to make sure it's done non-violently. So civil society would have been a very important component of his vision. The third, and this is where I'd like to emphasize the difference between Gandhi and every other political leader in the world today, with maybe 1 or 2 exceptions, is he believed in democracy in discourse. He was utterly civil and in the way he engaged with each other. He wanted to listen, he was the opposite of your president and my prime minister. Your president is utterly abusive, and my prime minister has not had a press conference in 6 years. He says he's the prime minister of India's largest democracy. He's a one-way monologue. And it's one-way monologue, and it's often abusive and derisive one-way monologue. So democracy in debate, in argument, civility in how you respond, so that the conversation itself is democratic. Those are ways in which Gandhi, I think, is the democratic thinker. Without really talking about the nitty-gritty of elections, proportional representations, X, Y, Z,
I'm afraid we have time for no more remarks. And before I give a vote of thanks to Dr. Guha for his thought-provoking and as encyclopedic as the time can allow, I just want to remind everyone that if you want to continue this conversation, we have an opportunity to have a smaller gathering with him in Roosevelt Room 203 at 3 p.m. today. But for now, please join me in issuing, and of course, there are copies of his books. Join me in thanking Dr. Guha for his books.